Hey guys, what's up? It's me, Sam33 here, and welcome to the show about Pokemon TCG stuff, mix-up. And today, we're gonna have analysis on the Aromatisse deck that has popped up all over cities and regionals, and has come out in X and Y, and yeah, pretty influential card in the game so far, and I'm here to talk about it today. I apologize for the lateness of this episode and the lack of updates from me in general. I have not had much time to do things. I needed a break after my long Pokemon Rumble video that took a long time and to edit. And then once I wanted to get back to making videos, I got sick, so I couldn't make any. And then regionals happened, and then here we are now. I can finally make videos again. I'll probably be doing these every 2 or 3 weeks, hopefully. Probably doing a flash fire review next. But anyway, that's all relevant today. Let's go talk about Aromatisse right now.
If I could name one card from XY that has definitely changed the game, it would have to be Muscle Band. But that's not the focus of today's episode. But the card that has changed the game second most is Yveltal. Okay, enough of that. Today's card is Aromatisse. Aromatisse is a 90 HP Stage 1 with the ability Fairy Transfer, which lets you move Fairy energy from one of your Pokemon to another as often as you want. If you've been playing this game for even just a year or two, you should remember one of the several Pokemon that can move energy around as much as you want. Hydreigon, Klinklang, Meganium, heck, all the way back to base set with Venusaur. There's a recurring theme with all those Pokemon though. All those Pokemon are Stage 2s. Aromatisse is a Stage 1, with only 90 HP, low enough that it can be searched out by Level Ball. Energy moving Pokemon have usually been pretty playable, so having one that's much faster has to be playable, right? Yes sirree it is. One card that's always been paired with energy moving Pokemon is Max Potion, or whatever equivalent it had at the time. Move all of your energy off of one of your damaged Pokemon, Max Potion it, put the energy back on. Pretty sweet, eh? There's really only one issue with Aromatisse, and that's that there really isn't any good attackers right now that only use Fairy energy. But we don't have to worry about that, because Prism and Rainbow energy exist. Fairy Transfer can move these energy around because they provide Fairy energy. With so many multi-type energy, you can include pretty much any basic attacker you can think of. There are a couple routes you can go with Aromatisse. There's the straight Fairy route, the all Rainbow and Prism route, and the mix of the two. First, let's quickly take a look at the straight Fairy route, because I don't really think it's that great of a deck. The main focus of this list is regular Xerneas. It's a nice and bulky basic Pokemon with 130 HP and the attack of Geomancy, which costs 1 Fairy energy and lets you search your deck for 2 basic Fairy energy and attach them to 2 of your bench Pokemon. This is quite the powerful attack for only 1 energy. Victini EX's attack is just a tad better than that, and that's an 110 HP EX, while this is an 130 HP non-EX. If you're going to use basic Fairy energy at all, including this card is a no-brainer. As for the attackers, well, that's a different story. The only Fairy-type attacker we have right now is Xerneas EX. It has 2 attacks. The first is Breakthrough. It does 60 damage and 30 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Its second attack is called X-Blast. It does 140 damage, and you can't use X-Blast the next turn. Even with Muscle Band, neither of these attacks hit for significant amounts of damage. If your opponent doesn't have a Mr. Mime out, Breakthrough can set up one-hit knockouts for X-Blast, but Mr. Mime is still a pretty common card, and it uses quite a bit of energy to attack. Even with its Dark Resistance, Yveltal EX does a lot of damage to it. Besides Xerneas EX, you can use colorless attackers as well. First, there's Bouffalant, a pretty tanky non-EX that can dish out pretty solid damage. With a Muscle Band and the 30 from Breakthrough, you could score a couple KOs with Goldbreaker. Next, there's Mewtwo EX. Pretty simple concept here. Move a ton of energy to it with Geomancy and Fairy Transfer, and dish out lots of damage. This guy's pretty vulnerable to Yveltal and Deoxys as well, so be a little careful with Mewtwo, and probably play a pretty high count of them too. Another card you definitely want in this deck is Fairy Garden. It's a stadium that gives any Pokemon with Fairy energy free retreat. Just like Darkrai Hydreigon, you can move energy onto any Pokemon you want and retreat them for free. Even if you don't like that it can be countered by other stadiums, it's definitely better than any other switching card, since you'll definitely only use those once, while Fairy Garden you will most likely get several uses out of it. And that's basically it for all the cards in this variant. I don't have a deck list for this variant, because I don't find it very good, but it should be pretty simple to build or find a deck list for online. Now onto something that doesn't lead nowhere. Next, we're going to look at the hybrid version. We're going to keep Xerneas in here for energy acceleration. Xerneas EX I'm going to cut for the time being, but if you expect any non-EX decks, Xerneas EX is a pretty good inclusion. You also might think Mewtwo is another keeper from the last list, but since you're playing Prism and Rainbow energy, you might as well just be playing Yveltal EX. Yveltal is stronger than Mewtwo, and has a better weakness as well. Another fun trick you can do with Yveltal is put 1 special and 2 fairy energy on it, then use Y-Cyclone to move the special energy off of it and conserve them for other Pokemon. You might also consider putting Fairy Garden back in, but there's another option for free retreat, and that's Darkrai EX. Since Fairy Garden is a stadium card, it's pretty easy for it to get countered by your opponent's stadiums. But Garbodor can shut off Darkrai's ability, so there's not a definite better card. There's also the option of playing a mix of them. You usually only need 1 Darkrai per game, so playing 1 of that and 2 Fairy Garden isn't a bad idea either. In fact, that's what the Singapore State's winning list played. The final staple Pokemon in this deck is Virizion EX. I mean, why not? Free immunity to Hypnotoxic Laser is fine with me. Some might question the reason for Virizion EX when Slurpuff exists, since Slurpuff gives the effect to all of your energy, and not just the special ones. Well, having to set up a stage 1 as opposed to just plopping down a basic is much harder and usually isn't worth the effort. We could also spend time talking about the tech cards, but I think it's best if we just look at the deck list and I'll talk about them there. Landorus EX is a nice card against Thundurus and Darkrai, both Hammerhead and Land's Judgment. It also has resistance to Thundurus, so you can just tank with it for a while against Plasma. Entei EX is obviously for the Virgin matchup. It one-shots Virizion and Genesect, has really high HP, and doesn't use that many energy. Victini EX might be the better choice, since it has Turbo Energize and only needs 1 Fire energy, but it can very easily be one-shot by Genesect, which kind of defeats the purpose of tanking with this deck. The next card is Zekrom EX. This is quite the odd inclusion, considering it discards so much energy when it attacks. But there are reasons why I included it. It's a Lightning type, so it's great against Yveltal EX and Lugia EX. The only other Lightning types you can use in this deck that one-shot those two are Raikou EX, which discards your special energy, Thundurus EX, which doesn't discard energy, but has less HP and uses more energy, which makes Yveltal stronger against you, and Zekrom, which is super frail. Not only does Zekrom EX have the most HP, but because it discards energy, it's much harder for Yveltal to knock it out. And if you use Geomancy enough times, you should be able to use multiple Strongbolts in succession. Or if you want to get risky, you can put a Muscle Band on Zekrom EX and try to knock out Yveltal or Lugia with Glinting Claw. Speaking of Muscle Band, Strongbolt can one-shot any 170 HP EX if you have a Muscle Band on it. Palkia EX doesn't one-shot Dragon EXs, but it is able to strafe and keep your energy safe. Combined with Suicune, you can strafe into that and make it very difficult for your opponent to get a knockout. If you don't have Suicune in play, you can just switch into Xerneas or any other non-EX or useless Pokemon you happen to have on your bench. Speaking of non-EX Pokemon, and Suicune for that matter, our next card is Suicune. Suicune is pretty much a staple in transfer decks. Its ability is so powerful against countless decks. I probably don't even need to tell you anything else about this card. I would like to add more Max Potion, but there are a lot of matchups that doesn't really do anything. Blastoise, Raybor, even Yveltal and Plasma can one-shot you a lot of the time. I'm not sure if 2 or 3 is the better number, but for now, I need the space, so it's 2. Next, we've got 2 Tool Scrapper. The Garbodor matchup is indeed salvageable with enough Tool Scrapper, and the deck is comprised of mostly techs anyway, so what's wrong with having a tech in item form? And pretty much every other deck will have either Muscle Bands or Float Stones in play, so it's not completely dead in every other matchup. The A-Spec for this deck is Dowsing Machine, which is pretty much the standard A-Spec nowadays. There are enough crucial items in this deck to play it over Computer Surge. There are a lot of basic Fairy energy in this deck, enough that there's only 6 special energy. This is so you can use Geomancy a few times before your first Xerneas goes down. With all that fairy energy in play, you should be able to use Yveltal and Zekrom to your heart's content. So there's the list. I haven't played too much of this list, but so far it's not bad. If you can't use Geomancy a few times, you're going to be in trouble, but if you do, Yveltal or Zekrom or whatever else should be able to get enough knockouts for you to be able to win. I wouldn't say it's top tier, but it's definitely a deck you should take seriously if you face it. There are other options for tech cards in this deck as well, but I'll wait until we've talked about the final deck list before we take a look at them. And speaking of our final deck list, it's time to talk about it. This one just plays Prism and Rainbow energy and skips all that fairy energy and Xerneas stuff. This idea was one I took from Xavier Chua, the winner of the Singapore State Championships. My list isn't exactly the same as his, but it has the same basic idea. So what does the deck include? Well, the main card in the deck is Thunderous EX. It's the only card in the format that can accelerate special energy. It's also a lightning type, which makes it a very nice starter against Yveltal and Lugia. But Thunderous can only attach energy to Plasma Pokémon, so the deck's going to need to play some of those too. The main one in this deck is Genesect EX. It allows you to play Plasma Energy to use Red Signal, and since you're only playing 8 other energy, you'll usually have a few turns where you won't have a Prism or Rainbow energy, and you can use a few attachments for Red Signal. And you can also play G-Booster. You usually can't get 3 straight KOs with it, but it's nice to have for your last KO or two. Next is Deoxys EX. It's nice to give Thunderous a little extra damage, especially against Yveltal and Lugia. Here's a situation that seems to happen a lot. You use Raid Knuckle on an Yveltal or Lugia, then next turn you attach a Muscle Band to Thunderous and hit the same Pokemon again, and put it at 160, 10 or 20 short of knocking it out. But if you plop a Deoxys down, you can knock out whatever lightning weak Pokemon you're hitting. It's also a great attacker against Yveltal EX. You can one-shot it with Helix Force if they have 5 energy on them, or 4 if Deoxys has a Muscle Band. We also have Palkia EX, but that was already in the hybrid version, so we don't need to discuss it any further. Now it's time to take a look at the list. This is definitely the list I've playtested the most, and I'm pretty happy with it. Landorus is much better in this deck than the hybrid list. Thunderous is much less consistent than Xerneas, so if you miss a way to get energy into your discard, you can use Hammerhead, since it does more damage than Raid Knuckle. Probably one of the strangest changes I made was going down to 1 Yveltal EX. With this deck, I found moving a boatload of energy to Yveltal would result in me losing all my energy in play, or I had so little energy in play that I couldn't even do enough damage to knock something out. Deoxys EX also punishes Pokemon with a lot of energy on them, so I just didn't find myself using Yveltal much with this deck. It is still worth it to play 1 in this deck though. It can still occasionally win the game with a giant Evil Ball, and it's one of your most powerful attackers that only needs 2 energy. Another card I've cut from this deck is Darkrai, in place for another Fairy Garden. With all the Pokemon in this list, I often found myself filling my bench up really quickly, and not having enough room for everything I wanted. I could never rely on just the 2 Fairy Garden for pre-retreat, since it would very easily get countered by another stadium, and trying to find your one other Fairy Garden can be difficult. With 3 Fairy Garden, it wasn't that difficult to find one if the one you had got countered, and having that extra bench space was nice as well. I've also included 2 Sigilyph and or Suicune in this deck. Usually your opponent only prepares for one of these guys popping up, but if you play 2, you can really catch them off guard sometimes and lock them out of the game. It's also a nice thing to have when you're using Palkia EX. It's a great thing to strafe into, and having that second Safeguarder gives you a backup if your first one goes down. I've decided to play one of each Safeguarder in this deck. Sigilyph has that nice 1 retreat, but Suicune has 10 more HP, and both Water and Psychic hit a fair amount of popular Pokemon for weakness, so I figured why not just play one of each. I've also opted to cut Skyla entirely from this deck. Skyla was just not helping me at all. It seemed like every time I drew into one, I would just get another supporter with it. And there's no basic energy to get with Professor's Letter, so there weren't really many things I could grab with Skyla when I did have another supporter. I did occasionally get G-Booster with it, but not enough to warrant playing 3 of them. 4 Colress might seem overkill, but with 14 basic Pokemon in this deck, Colress very rarely drew me 1 or 2 cards. This time around, I did find room for the 3rd Max Potion, and I am glad I did. A lot of decks will try to 2-shot your Pokemon or snipe them off the bench with Hammerhead or Night Spear, and Max Potion can really change the tide of those games in your favor. And that is the list. So how has this list been doing in testing? I've been liking it so far. It doesn't go off for quite a few turns, but with Max Potion, Red Signal, and Safeguard, you can really control the game and stop your opponent's deck from doing what it's supposed to. But with a deck like this, there's an infinite number of possible tech cards you can include to improve whatever matchup you desire. So we're going to take a look at a few of those right now. The first one is Cobalion EX. Righteous Edge is another low energy attack like Raid Knuckle and Hammerhead, which is nice against decks with special energy, which is actually a lot of them. Plasma, Virgin, Yveltal, other fairy decks, and plenty of other less common decks as well. As seen by Enhanced Hammer, getting to discard those special energy can be really powerful, and even Steel Bullet can be a nice attack against Sigalith and Suicune. Next is Skarmory EX. It does a solid 120 after the defending Pokemon was hit by Raid Knuckle or Hammerhead. With a Muscle Band, that can one-shot 170 HP EXs, which is actually kind of hard for this deck. None of your attackers have that high of a base damage, and Skarmory just so happens to fill that empty hole in this deck nicely. Another option for that 120 damage is Kyurem. This is a Plasma Pokemon, but it can fit into the Xerneas version if you want. Again, it does 120 damage, just like Skarmory. Only difference is your opponent doesn't have to have damage on their active for you to do 120 damage. So if for whatever reason you want to do that, you can. It's also got that water typing, great against Landorus. You do already have Suicune, but you need a Muscle Band for that to one-hit KO Landorus. We also have Rayquaza Dragonvolt. Shred is powerful enough to one-hit KO any Dragon Pokemon in the game, but it's got really low HP, which is why I didn't include it in the main list. Blastoise and Raybor can so easily KO your Rayquaza back, so you'd have to have a ton of energy in play to justify using it. One nice thing about it is Dragon Pulse. Against Black Kyurem and Rayquaza EX, dealing 80 damage for 1 energy, or even 120 with a Muscle Band is really powerful. And if they can't get an attacker up that turn to knock out your Rayquaza, you've just earned yourself 2 easy prizes. If you're worried about Blastoise or Raybor in your area, playing 1 or 2 Rayquaza can improve your odds against them. The next card is Lugia EX. This card is a nice game ender for the Plasma list. Just like Skarmory and Kyurem, it can one-hit KO most softened up Pokemon, and of course, get you another prize for it. The only problem is you need 3 colored energy in play and a Plasmon Lugia to pull that off. With that kind of setup, you're usually winning anyway, and probably already have a pretty good lead, so you probably won't even need to take that many prizes to win. In the situations where you really need to use Plasma Gale, you don't have enough energy in play, or the bench space. But those rare moments you can pull that off, you can make some pretty steep comebacks. And the final tech card is Mega Venusaur or Mega Blastoise. Yes, I just said you can play a Mega Evolution in a deck, but think about it for a sec. Mega Evolutions are near impossible to kill in one hit. So you have Max Potion and can heal it off every time it gets hit and have a totally indestructible 200 plus HP monster. There are quite a bit of problems with this idea though. You'll have to have the first form out for a turn, then you'll have to waste a turn not attacking. And since Megas are evolutions, you can't use Prism energy for their attack cost, only Rainbows, which severely limits the amount of energy you can use on a Mega. I feel like this concept is far too inconsistent to really work in this deck, but it's a cool thing to theorize about. And now for the matchups of this deck. I'll go over the matchups for both the Plasma and the hybrid versions of this deck. Yveltal Darkrai is a favorable matchup. With the Plasma version, Thundurus and Landorus hit Yveltal, Darkrai, and Bouffalant for weakness. You can just use Hammerhead and Raid Knuckle for a while max potioning your Pokemon if they get hit. Hammerhead is especially good early on, while their Yveltals are on the bench, where their resistance doesn't work. If they go crazy and put a ton of energy on Yveltal, Deoxys or even your own Yveltal can KO them back. With the Xerneas version, Zekrom-EX is always a huge threat for their Yveltals. If they're playing around that, your own Yveltal, Landorus, and Suicune are good attackers against the rest of their deck. Overall, you have several options against this deck, and their deck is predictable enough that you should be able to respond to whatever they're attacking with. Yveltal Garbodor is even to slightly unfavorable. Garbodor can be a pain, but you can easily play around it. You won't need Aromatisse that much if you play your energy right in the first place, and you can real quick rearrange them every time you Tool Scrapper Garbodor. Speaking of, one nice thing you can do with the Plasma version is Tool Scrapper Garbodor, then Red Signal it and KO it. Once you do that, it becomes an easier version of the straight Yveltal matchup, unless they bench a second Trubbish. Usually you won't have enough resources to kill 2 Garbodors, but the match will probably be too close to over by that point. I'd say this is one of your toughest matchups, but with some good draws, it isn't that difficult. Plasma is slightly favorable for the Plasma version, but even to slightly unfavorable for the Hybrid version. With the Plasma version, just like against Yveltal, Thundurus and Landorus hit everything they have for weakness. It's best to use Pokemon with 180 HP to keep them safe from Lugia EX. With the Hybrid version, you have to be careful with your giant Yveltals, since Deoxys can easily KO them in one hit. If you get enough Geomancies off, you can get a few KOs with Zekrom EX through Muscle Band or Lugia's Lightning Weakness. With both decks, Sigilyph and Suicune are one of the keys to the matchup. All the non-EXs they have are pretty easy to KO with your Pokemon. You also have to watch out for Red Signal, as Lugia can easily take 2 or 3 prizes without you being able to stop it. Overall, Plasma has enough tricks up its sleeve to make it a little tricky to deal with, but through a couple type advantages, it isn't too bad of a matchup. Blastoise is even to slightly unfavorable for the Plasma list, but unfavorable for the Hybrid version. Palkia and the Safeguarders are your big players in this matchup. With the Plasma list, you can soften up their Black Kyurem with Thundurus and Landorus, then finish them off with Strafe, with the damage boost from Deoxys and Muscle Band. With the Xerneas version, you're forced to 2-shot their Black Kyurem with Strafe. Catcher is your biggest issue here, as they can bring up a Palkia and Black Ballista it. The Plasma list has tricks like Red Signal and G-Booster to give you an edge in this matchup. The Xerneas list pretty much only has Palkia doing 100 every turn. The Plasma list also has room for more Safeguard Pokemon, and those force them to use Blastoise, which can get killed pretty easily, and you may be able to leave them without a Blastoise for the rest of the game. The Plasma list can definitely play around the constant barrage of Black Kyurems and Keldeos, but the Xerneas list just isn't fit for this matchup. Braybor is a little easier, only because they usually don't have room to fit Pokemon catchers, since they have to play switching cards and Delphox. If they do have room for catchers, it's about the same as Blastoise. They do have better non-EX attackers in the form of Delphox and Reshiram, but you can still KO both of those fairly easily with Suicune or Yveltal in Delphox's case. So yeah, pretty much the same as the Blastoise matchup. Virizion Genesect is favorable for the Xerneas version, but unfavorable for the Plasma list. For the Xerneas version, Entei, Zekrom, and Yveltal all give Virgin huge trouble. It depends on the situation, but they're all very strong. The Plasma version lacks both Entei and Zekrom, and it has less Yveltal, so it doesn't have very many options for power. It does have G-Booster, but that's less consistent than the other options. If you want to improve this matchup, you can always include an Entei and it'll be improved, but if you don't expect Virgin, don't bother. Landorus and Thundurus are great for setting up knockouts on their Virizions and Genesects. Whenever possible, you'd rather be using Thundurus, because if they're playing Drifblim, you're going to want to be recovering your special energy with Raiden Knuckle, so Shadow Steel does less damage. You also want to prevent your Pokemon with energy from getting knocked out for the same reason. Overall, Virgin's immense power in the form of G-Booster and Shadow Steel, and not to mention Enhanced Hammer, and your lack of counters for it is what makes this matchup as difficult as it is for the Plasma list. Landorus, Mewtwo, Raichu, Garbodor isn't favorable for either deck, for obvious reasons. Garbodor, as usual, slows your deck down a bit. Landorus is also very scary if you happen to start with Thundurus, or if you miss an Aromatisse to evolve your Spritzee. Yveltal is also weak for Raichu, which makes using that pretty risky. Landorus is probably your only good attacker in this matchup, but even that's not that strong considering they also have Landorus, but they have lasers and you don't. With the Plasma list, the Tool Scrapper Red Signal combo is always open, and once it's done, your Safeguarders can be pretty useful. Big Basic Garbodor is focused on countering every popular Pokemon, and your deck is every popular Pokemon put into one deck, so naturally this matchup isn't good for you. So both these Aromatisse decks have their strengths and weaknesses, but overall, my favorite is the Plasma version. As I said before, it's very good at controlling the game through Red Signal and Safeguard, and having type advantage against most popular decks. The Xerneas version is too vulnerable to Garbodor and Blastoise, and is a little tighter on space due to having to fit all that energy in. The Plasma version can have trouble drawing energy, but the 1-energy attackers can carry the deck well enough while you get more energy into play. This deck is definitely one of my top choices for this upcoming regionals.
And there you go. That's my analysis on the Aromatisse deck. I thank you all for watching. Hope you all enjoyed. Did did take me a while to make this video, and I feel like after making it for so long, I was pretty educated on this deck, and I thought I did a pretty good job representing it. So yeah, my next video will probably be a review on the Flashfire set. I may have a video between that, but I have no idea what it will be. It might be like a premature deck analysis of a deck from Flashfire, but I don't know. I do have 2 states and a regionals to report on, but I might just stick those quickly in another video because I did kind of poorly at all of them. So I don't know if it's really worth talking about them. Nothing really insightful in them. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Later.